for me, I do certain things where I know if I have a personal trainer, I'm going to work out. So twice a week, I work out with a personal trainer. Going to the gym just doesn't work for me because I
Right.
want to get it done early in the morning time. So signing up for gym classes or membership is a waste for me. So, I think for your audience, it's like there is no one set way of doing self-care or creating that space for yourself. And some people, it could be they enjoy cooking, so they want to cook, they infuse their creativity in it, but it's something where you are feeling, you know it's your space is the way I would best describe it.
It's
And
almost
then
like tapping into like, what do I need in order to be the best version of myself? Like,
yeah.
that's the question is, what do I need? What allows me to be the most calm, centered version? And
Mhm.
just doing that without the guilt. Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Enough Already podcast. This is the show for consultants and coaches who've had enough already of whatever holds them back from forging their own path to success in their careers, their businesses, and their lives. And a lot of my clients are one of those people like I was who left corporate to start their own business because of that midlife transition, which is so scary, so confusing. And so for this reason, I am super excited to have on the show Rajinder Rai, who is a former pharmacist turned life empowerment coach, or I'm sure she's got a better title for what she's all about. And she's going to tell you how you could take that very confusing, nebulous midlife journey into a catalyst to your highest potential. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Rajinder.
Thank you, Betsy, for that warm welcome. And I'm, so happy to be here. It's been a while since we've caught up, but so much exciting news to share with you and your audience about my midlife journey and all of the transitions that came along with it, both professionally and personally. As you mentioned, I am a pharmacist, 3 decades, owning my own pharmacies and running that. Which has been amazing. But, when I kind of came to my midlife crisis, as we would call it, or pivot is more of the accurate word, is what I would call. It just came to that there was something more that was for me. Having a business, you're just in the grind. And I didn't realize everything that was going on with me physically, emotionally, spiritually, because you're so just in your business and raising kids, and you kind of almost forget about yourself and time. You think there's so much time that you have, and all of a sudden, I turned 50 last year. And it was, wow, I'm already 50. And, where am I going with my life? To kind of backtrack, I had a little intervention with the universe because I was forced to kind of stop because of a personal health reason, and my daughter kind of getting diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. So that was like a real awakening for me as a pharmacist professionally and as a mom of like, how did this happen? How did I let this happen? Somebody that's like an A-type personality, always wanting to be in control of everything. How did I let this happen? And it kind of started my journey of self-discovery of like, what am I doing with my life? Where am I spending my time? How am I feeling? Where do I want to go from here? I've always wanted, to do something else, outside of the brick and mortar pharmacy that I have. And I was always looking, but I was in that fixed mindset of it had to do with pharmacy. I'm a pharmacist, so it should have to do with medications. So I was, going to get my board certification in geriatric medicine, believe it or not. And after my daughter's diagnosis, I fell into wanting to figure out what was going on, and kind of learned about functional medicine, which is more of root cause medicine. So I went to do more studying with that, and training, which, was great, where I was able now to help clients really kind of figure out what was going on beyond that quick fix of, getting being the pharmacist providing the medication for my patients. But even then, I really felt like there was something more. My clients were getting better, but there was still something missing. I didn't feel I was getting the results that I could with them. And so I further, again, along with my own personal journey, as I was, opening up my horizons and realizing things that I wanted more out of life, I fell into the teachings of feminine energy, which, I think, running your own business and being in a clinical mindset, I had like completely disconnected, from that thought process, because I'm a doer, like put out the fire, whatever needed to get done. You're just like very linear in your thinking. And I didn't realize how disconnected I really was with my own intuition and trust. And a lot of the choices that I was making was based on running on this fear of, my productivity was based on how well the pharmacies did. So my whole identity was tied into my work, which a lot of us, men and women, we have that identity, and our work is so part of it, regardless of, owning your own business or being in corporate, or being an employee, wherever you are, that identity is so tied with us. And I feel like when you're in midlife, as your body is changing, it's a great opportunity to start taking some of those layers off and really start learning who you are and what is it that you want out of your, not as a mom, not as a daughter, not as a wife, not as a pharmacist, whatever your titles and roles may be. And as I learned about tapping into my own feminine energy, I realized who I was. And so here we are.
That is a lot to unpack. There's so much power in everything that
Yeah.
you're saying. I want to break things down to like smaller parts, because what I'm hearing you say is like at the beginning stage, like where you were when we were sort of like at the ordinary day at the office. You were you were not just a pharmacist, but you owned a pharmacy that was very
Mhm.
successful. And it sounds like there were seeds of the discontent that was going on even when you were there. Like, oh, I wonder if there's more. I think I could do more. And then the catalyst for you was your own health issues and your daughter's diagnosis. That was like your wake up call. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah. I was, again, I thought I was a great pharmacist, doing everything that, my patients needed. But I was limited, in what I can do. I felt, I mean, at the time I didn't realize it, but I was boxed in as my role. And with that, I realized there was so much more that I could be doing. And you're comfortable. You're,
Yeah.
we have multiple pharmacies, so the business was doing well, and I should be thinking about just retiring. But after I went through the treatment with my daughter, I realized that we were very lucky that I'm in the healthcare field, and I was able to ask certain questions, navigate it, but it was still overwhelming. At the end of the day, I was a mom, and I, wanted to protect my daughter. And navigating the health system, even for somebody in the health as a health professional, was very difficult. And
So
then,
it's so it sounds like at that point where you were at that like discontent and a wake up call, you applied your analytical mind to say, I just need to figure out what the heck's going on here. Like I need to come up with another solution to help my daughter, and I got to figure out what's going on with me. And it seems like you applied your analytical mind to say, I got to figure out what's going on here. Just like from your training, you used your natural strengths to make sense out of the confusion. Is that accurate? Or you just went with the hunger. Like, I just got to know why, what's going on.
no, I think you're, you put it in the right terms, it was that way because it was a little bit of, the guilt of, like how do, she was 18 years old, like how does that happen? And there was that the hunger of knowing why. I think prior to that, my health, conditions, I never asked why. It was it was about 10 years prior that I had my own health conditions. I just went right back to work because again, my whole identity was on, you know, my work. If I wasn't productive, if I wasn't working, then who was I? What
Mm.
value was I bringing?
I'm sure
And so I
nobody's who's
didn't.
listening and understands the identity, the challenge of your identity being tied to your job. Like, I
Right.
totally get that. Like, that's one of the, like, to me, switching from my consulting business to what I do now as a brand messaging person and a marketing person and all those things. It was like, oh my gosh, to embrace that, I had to let go of this identity. I had to close down the consulting business. I had to stop associating myself with consulting as like me being the consultant to be this business mentor. How did you go through that? Because that was really hard for me. And I know it's really hard for a lot of people who are listening, is the whole idea of letting go of an old identity to embrace what's there. Like what tips or recommendations you would have around like, okay, how to let go of my identity as a pharmacist and who I was. How did you do that?
Yeah. And it was really hard, to be honest, because for me, that's all I've ever known. And so everything, that I associated my success with was my success as a pharmacist, a pharmacy owner. But I realized when you start creating space for yourself, the first and foremost was that I had to start taking care of my physical health. I
Mm.
wasn't, I was one of those people that were like, oh, I don't need sleep. I can function on 4 hours and operate and, I'm super mom, super woman. I wore that badge very proudly and probably condescending to other people that felt like they needed to slow down and rest, to be transparent. But I realized it wasn't until after my daughter's treatment, as corny as it sounds, I walked by a mirror and got like a glance of me, like a side profile, and I didn't recognize who I was,
Mm.
and it was just like, at that moment, I was like, I don't know who this is, and I didn't like what I saw in the mirror. I was tired. I had gained weight. Um, I was bitter. There's a lot of just different emotions, but I didn't know what it was at the time. I just didn't know what was going on. And so the first
So
step,
you didn't immediately just say, okay, I'm not going to be this person. It was more like a recognition of like, okay, so your step one is really just like being facing that reality, like that Sue Monk Kid quote where she says, that the truth may set you free, but it'll shake up the sweet life that you were living, something along
right,
those lines. I don't remember the exact quote, but something along those lines as you saw yourself in the mirror and you're like, oh my gosh. And then you had to sit with that reality of who have I become? And then you had to take action. And then
right.
so step one was that recognition. Step two was, it sounds like some radical self-care.
Right. So I think what happens is that sometimes we don't want to be quiet with ourselves and really look in the mirror. I mean, I know we look in the mirror every day when we're getting ready, but do we really look in the mirror?
Oh,
You know,
that's a good
right?
distinction.
And so I
Yeah.
think that's what it was. And so I knew things were changing with me, but I was ignoring it. And it's easier to stay busy in what you're doing, whether you're throwing yourself into your family, whether you're throwing yourself into your career, your business, and use that almost as a crutch, like, okay, I'm too busy, because you don't want to be quiet with yourself. And I think, like you said, that first step was recognition that, this is not right, there's something off. And so with that, I had to sit with myself and start looking at what are these feelings that are coming up, and what are, where are they coming from. And for me, the first thing was I didn't physically feel healthy. And so that was the first step of realizing that I needed to change. As I was doing the functional medicine studies, I realized there was a lot of things that caused inflammation in my body. Excuse me. And it would be from, the foods I was eating to, not sleeping properly. So a lot of just simple changes that made huge impact, where you're just starting to learn to put yourself first. And it's in the beginning, you think it's selfish that, oh, I'm taking time away from, family and business where I should be, but, you're your biggest asset. And
So
so
interesting. I'm sorry. I have to. There's a memory that's jogging in me when you're saying that. Um, I remember when we were working on your branding and your website copy. I think you have a framework that you call the pause model or something like
Mhm.
that. Like now I realize, like you do. That is right. You have that model. So
Right.
that's why pause is so important to you. It's not just some fun acronym. It seems
Mm-mm.
like the heart of what you were talking about. Is that so? If that's accurate, can you share a little bit more? Because I feel like that this seems to be like the big differentiation is like, okay, you're at that crossroads and you're saying pause, and you
Right.
could have looked in the mirror and just walked on, but you decided like, no, I'm going to really take in what I'm seeing and use this as a moment of pause.
Right. No, and there's, even at that moment, like you said, you could either just ignore it and continue and just be on your, path that you're on. You could also just say, I need a quick fix and seek out whatever that quick fix would be for you at that moment. Or you take that pause. And what that, the acronym really stands for is taking you through stages of what I went through and what I take my clients through is to really understand, P for power. Where is your power being drained and where is your power surge? So it's
So
looking at
that's
both.
why you went, and your first step was, I'm going to work on sleeping and I'm working
Mhm.
on where the whole thing. So
Physical.
continue. Yeah. So go on. Power. So power for you
Yeah.
is energy related to your physicality.
Right. So
Think-
physical, like, also just learning to be present. There's so many P words in there, but really it's the power of now bringing yourself into that present moment. I'm not thinking about the past. I'm not thinking about the future. Like, where are my kids going to be? Where am I going to be? Like, I'm talking about in the moment. Right. And then, A is awaken to like now get off of that autopilot, the way you've been running things, letting things on auto mode of get up in the morning time, you have your routine, get to work, and then you come home and whatever it is, you're just on autopilot, just to kind of get things going. The real key was then which is
wait.
unbelievable.
Wait, I don't
Mhm.
want to leave the A yet. Like
Okay.
that was, there's too much in the A. I don't want to leave the A yet. So like awaken for you, because that could sound like some sort of woo-woo spirituality kind of thing.
Right.
But it seems like awakeness or awaken is like sort of like intentionality or like what, like it sounds like there's a little bit of attunement and intentionality of like, I'm going to tune into my life and I'm going to tap into what I like, more of like what I want and intuition, or what else, like can you put like a non-woo version for those who are
Yeah,
not, really
of
spiritual? Like,
course.
what do you mean by
No,
awaken?
well, for me, it's like, for me, again, it was you're on autopilot because you have to, like, again, the those people that are in that grind mode where I was, you're just on the go. You have a plan in your head. It's not that you don't have direction, but the thing is you've just said you're not aware of what else is going on. You may be ignoring your body. You may be ignoring cues from, you know, people, from even your business. Like sometimes you're just in that zone where you're just not, aware of what else is going on. And so to awaken out of that is like, okay, it's time to take the driver's seat yourself and take some of that self responsibility. I think is more of what it is. And whatever that may be, okay, maybe you need to start taking self responsibility in your business, your professional life, your personal life as well too, whereas you're just coasting. And I think that that is what it is. And even with the woo woo, it is, I mean, again, being a pharmacist, I was like completely on one end, and now doing this self-discovery, I feel like there is a place for that as well too, where it is kind of like a fog lifting of, almost like running life in, rose-colored glasses, like you are seeing what you want to see, and so that awakening could also be that, okay, sometimes you have to face the reality of what's going on.
Got it.
You are getting older, and what you
So
were doing before may not work, like, maybe long nights, not sleeping, not eating properly, traveling a lot, whatever it may be, may have worked, or the way you worked out. But now it's time to, like, okay, let's awaken to, you're hitting a certain stage in life, you're physically, physiologically changing, you know, and so you need to make some changes in your life.
Okay, so I think this is starting to become clear on this whole pathway of what do you do in midlife. So the current state, where somebody's starting off is, everything's great until it stops. So now I've had this amazing career, and all of a sudden I'm starting to hear those whispers that there's something more, there's something more, there's something more. Don't know exactly what it is. And then some sort of catalyst happens. Like for you, there was health issues in your daughter. And then, so the first step really in terms of the process, so that's the current state. So the steps between, we're going to get to what that future state's going to be. But the
Mhm.
first step is the P, which is the power of like your own energy and really taking care of, like, it's almost like triaging your health thing, getting
Right.
sleep, reversing all of that stuff. And then the work begins. So you've gotten yourself, energetically in a better state, because you can't really,
Right.
it seems like you can't really do all of this work until energetically you get in a better state. Then the A is the awakening. And it seems like the awakening is about pulling the lens back and saying, looking at your life more holistically, of saying, it's not just like I'm an autopilot, like this is what I do with my career, this is my routines. It's taking a look back and say, all right, now, am I living a life that's in alignment with whatever new values or new
Mhm.
experiences are coming up in me? And am I living in that alignment? And so it could be a variety of different things. But it seems like what you're saying is, before you were kind of like tossed around by fate and you just sort of going along with it. And now it's time
Mhm.
to move into the destiny kind of zone where it's like, all right, I'm taking responsibility for my life and making choices more intentionally, what would bring more alignment to the new values that are starting to emerge. That's the A. Am I hearing that
Yes.
right? Or
Yeah, no, you explained it very well. I think that's what it is that, again, in midlife, both men and women, you come to where, there is changes in your body, and that's kind of like the rattle. You don't need to have, like, in my case, I had some major, life issues that, woke me up. But we all know that, you're hitting 40 plus, your body is changing. And so you can be proactive with what you want to do in life. And instead of waiting till that, you know, crisis per se. But the next layer of it is that even when you do that, you have the problem with people retracting back to old comfort. That's what we're creatures of habit, is that you have to unravel stories that and conditioning that we've had. So
is
for
that the
me,
you?
the you unravel.
Ooh, good. I love that. Okay.
Yeah. So
So we've gotten our energy back. We've taken the bigger lens. Now we see what's what and what's not in alignment. Now we're unraveling. I love this. Okay, go on. I'm excited.
so yeah, so the unravel is basically now looking at these stories. And so again, with my clients, I would, we would get to a certain point, and then, they would retract backwards, and I'd be like, there's something wrong. What am I doing? And I realized what it is until you replace that story or that belief with the new story, nothing is going to change.
That's true.
So that's where basically, when you asked me, how did you change, from my identity as a pharmacist, and now my identity as Rajinder, really,
Mm,
is because I had to unravel these stories and things that I didn't even realize I was holding on to from, when I was 7, 8 years old, of something that happened on the, at school in second grade. And I didn't get picked for a play, and still, somehow was in my brain psyche somewhere. But what it is that you get told these stories about, this is the way to do something. This is what productivity is. This is what success is. This is what, being healthy is. And so you have this, preconditioning that, if you don't fit into it, that's where, again, our fears come up, and where you're always in that defense mode or that sympathetic mode, right? And so, especially when you're in midlife, if you're always operating in that sympathetic fight, flight, flee mode, frozen mode, they even call it, you're not going to, that's where you start having health issues, because you're running on cortisol instead of the other hormones that you need to operate. And so, without going down that rabbit hole, but in general, you're always on defense, where your body, even though you may not think that you're under any kind of stress, is perceiving stress. And so that perceived stress, your body doesn't know the difference. And
Right.
so that's when, inflammation happens, sleep disturbances, other chronic conditions can come up. And so again, that stage of life, it's not an overnight thing. This is an accumulation of how you've been living your life up until now. And so the unraveling is really now taking some of those stories, some of that preconditioning. It could be cultural, it could be, in your family, of what is going on, that why do you feel that, you're in this fixed mindset, is what I would call it, that I'm a
So
pharmacist,
I'm sorry.
this is my role. And so that is all I'm capable of doing, versus to now where I have opened up possibilities, because I feel like I can do more than just, the role of my, being a pharmacist. Not, I love being a pharmacist, but what I mean is that I've opened up who I am, and who I can work with, and how I can work with them. But I never thought about that like a few years ago, because I thought this is my role and this is my bubble, and I'm going to stay in that bubble. It wasn't until I was able to shift myself into this growth mindset, which I think for anyone that's, an entrepreneur, to have a successful business, again, both men and women, you have to go through this almost identity shift of that you are capable of these possibilities. It's one to manifest, but then to embody that this is what you want is you have to do that.
So it's interesting is like to me in my experience, first as an individual and as a business mentor, and I work with people and their stories and their fears all the time, is I feel like that there's some stories that you can, you can kind of shift with a little bit of awareness. Like, okay, like, like, no, I can't learn marketing, to I can learn marketing. But some of the other stories, like my identity is like, this is who I am, or some other ones, like they're a little bit more resistant. So what do you do with like the more resistant stories? And why are some of these stories like really resistant? Because that seems like that's the big thing, is we have to take on this myth and story is I am my job title. I am the company that I used to be affiliated with, or even now I am my company. I am my work, rather than I am me who's doing work. And this is an expression of who I am, but it's not who I am. Why is that? Like, what do you do with some of those stories that are very resistant? They are, you have to do, like, what do you do with them? And why are they
Well,
so resistant?
it's a process. It's not something that, again, a quick fix. And so there's usually some deep rooted story within, for women, a lot of times it has to do with, guilt, or that shame, or people pleasing, not feeling enough, and almost even the the invisibility. I'm, South Asian, and so it was very hard, like, for me to come out and be more public, because you're supposed to be more reserved and you are supposed to be quiet. And in fact, even when I started working as a pharmacist, it was really hard for me to look at people in their eye, because looking at somebody's, in their eye was disrespectful.
Mm.
Just, even back then, I had to like learn all of this. And now it's kind of, I had to understand about first, again, you have to be in that energetic stage of where you feel the energy to even want to do something. You give yourself that space to start thinking and listening to your thoughts, that awareness. And then the unraveling is really trying to like, why not you? Why not me? What is the reason that is holding you back? And so really going through, and this is kind of like the work that I do now, is really kind of in that stage of unravel, is to really take my clients through that process of what is those stories and what is really holding you back from having the life, having the career, having the business that you really want. Because we can all work hard, in my pharmacy world, again, we have created a really successful business, but I boxed myself in.
Mm.
Because when I started, I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't have a plan other than it being successful, but I didn't have a vision of what success meant. And so I think the unraveling also is to really understand who you are and what it means to be successful for you, and then to create that life that way. And sometimes what's holding you back could be some stories that you were holding on to, interaction you had with somebody, anything from previously where you have not brought that part of your life to the present.
Got it. So
Mhm.
we're getting our energy, we're getting that bigger perspective. Now we're unraveling, all the different myth stories, things that are kind of holding us back from whatever it is that we want, and
Mhm.
unraveling even what is it we ultimately want. So I'm assuming we're getting to something funner at S, because it seems like that was all hard work. What's happening at
Yeah.
S?
Well, S is self. I feel like that is where you're giving yourself space to really start taking care of yourself. And again, for me, like, I've always been like, oh, whatever the kids need, put them first. Whatever the business needs, put the business first, family, everything. And to even think like, as something as simple as like, okay, I'm going to take an hour out to go get my nails done. I would have to think, do I have time this week to do it?
Mm.
As simple as something like that. And self-care is such
Which
a
is crazy because a
right,
business owner, we're the
right,
worst bosses.
right.
We are worse than any of our worst bosses. Like, why
Yeah.
shouldn't you be able to get your nails done in the middle of a
Yeah.
work day?
But so we, that, and self-care is like, again, a term that's used loosely for anything and what it means to you. And so for me, what I found is that the space I need is my own silent space. So my
Mm.
mornings are really important to me, where I will wake up early when nobody else is awake and it's quiet. And that is my time just to be with myself. And that, like, thoughts come through, like sometimes when I'm creating content or creating, my programs, that's like my time. And I spend the mornings, I listen to mantras. Sometimes it's just quiet. My workouts are in the morning time. Everything that I want to do for myself is during that time. And
And it's
so,
so beautiful too, because get on the airplane. I remember when my kids were little, I've always tuned out that whole like put your mask
yeah,
on. And I had my little like baby and my toddler sitting next to me, and they're like, put your mask on. I'm like, what are you kidding? I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, it's going
exactly.
straight there. But then as I gotten older, I'm like, I have to, because I'll never be a person that I need to be for them. And that's so hard. And I love what you're talking about here is literally before anything else happens, put your mask on. What gives you energy? What allows you to be the best version of
Mhm.
yourself? That seems to be, it's like self-care. Seems like you're taking self-care out of like that, just, bubble bath, and, you could play
Mhm.
golf once in a while, to something a little bit more significant around what allows me to be the best version of myself, and
Mhm.
make sure that that happens so that I have what I need for the rest of the day.
Yeah, and it's something that it's not like a one-off. So it's something that I give myself every day, because that, like you said, that is what I need to kind of operate the rest of the day, and show up as Rajinder, and then show up as a pharmacist, show up as mom, as a wife, as a daughter, what, everything else that comes secondary. because I took care of Rajinder first. And I think
And
again, and it should be the same whether it's men or women, right? It's like that principle is there for all of us, because if we are showing up as the best version of ourselves individually, then you collectively will come together better. You make better decisions. Your reactions are different. Stress is always going to be there. Like, even after doing all of the work that I've done, it's not like my stress load has reduced. It's actually probably worse, but my reactivity has changed. My taking it personally and internalizing what's happening around me as my fault has changed. And I think that is huge, because it's so natural for us to do that. Instead, it's like I've given myself that space to step back and to look at the bigger picture and make decisions based on what I need to do that's best for me, and not feel guilty about it. And I think that is one of the other things, is that a lot of times that you may create these rituals for yourself, but then you're like in guilt mode for so long to get over that, oh my gosh, I did this, and then then it kind of defeats that whole purpose. And so I think that creating, the S part is like to freely create space for yourself without the guilt, without judgment. That if you are healthy, especially as women, I feel like, I'm biased, I'm a woman, I'm going to say that, we're the nucleus of our bubble. And so if you are healthy, then, everyone around you will be healthy. And so that is so important, that it's like, beyond wearing that mask, it's like, actually, like you said, if something was to happen, I'm going to grab my kids first, right? That's the mode you would go into. The same thing, like, when my daughter was diagnosed, I didn't care about myself. When she was going, it was almost like self-torturing, that like, she's going through this, how can I be happy? She's suffering, I should be suffering along with her. And so, it's just automatic to kind of go into that mode. But then you realize, it is actually my kids that pointed some of these things out, is that, when I tell them, again, as I've been going through my own personal, self-discovery and journey, that, I'm like sharing with them, like, oh, you should do this, and, relax, and, there, you need to be balanced. And then they called me out. Well, mom, when do you ever relax?
mm,
And so I realized that, as adults, parents, mentors, you have to, it's what you're doing that they're seeing. It's not like you could have these great protocols, and you could have great advice, and you can talk to people and tell them what to do. But if you don't embody what you say and actually practice it, they're learning by your actions. And so then I realized that, okay, I can just talk about it. I have to actually embody. And that was really when I fell into, again, you know, that self-discovery mode for myself. And I think that's where the S came in, where, what, why do I feel guilty for taking
right.
time off?
Well, that's
I
why the
should.
you is so important, is to get rid of
Mhm.
that myth so that you can create that space.
Right.
But I love what you're talking about, because it's not about right words, it's about right action,
Mhm.
and really pursuing right action. But I like how you're talking about with your self-care routine, that you could say, well, you got to wake up and you got to go for, a hard workout and all of that. And that feels very masculine, 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 like, got to do that. But it seems like there's a balance. Like, yes, you're going to do that, and you're going to do your mantras, and you're going
Right.
to do your creative time. And it feels like, when a self-care standpoint, for men and women, we just have to be balanced between, like the workout from that standpoint, and the receiving, and the chill, and the putting those together kind of gives you that
Right.
that sense of self, so that you can be your best version, as you go throughout your day. That's really great.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think, just to finish that off, is that it's different for each person.
Yeah.
The thing is, you could have like a framework of like, yes, journal, or, work out, but you have to find what works for you, what's going to stick, you know? And so for me, that's, I do certain things where I know if I have a personal trainer, I'm going to work out. So twice a week, I work out with a personal trainer. going to the gym just doesn't work for me because I
Right.
want to get it done early in the morning time. So signing up for gym classes or membership is a waste for me. So, I think for your audience, it's like there is no one, set way of doing self-care or creating that space for yourself. And some people, it could be they enjoy cooking, so they want to cook, they infuse their creativity in it. But it's something where you are feeling, you know, it's your space is the way I would best describe it.
It's
And
almost
then
like tapping into like, what do I need in order to be the best version of myself? Like,
yeah.
that's the question is, what do I need? What allows me to be the most calm, centered version? And
Mhm.
just doing that without the guilt.
Yeah. And you know what? You say calm and centered, there is this version like where everybody thinks, okay, you're Zen or something. Life is dynamic. Okay. I just want to be real with it. Just like things are going to go up and down, but creating that space just allows you to bounce back quicker.
Yes. Yes.
So don't think that, okay, that if things are happening to you, you're doing something wrong or, there's points where I have my highs and I have my lows even now. But what like I said, I'm able to do is I can just step back because I
Yeah.
have that space.
And it's almost like there's muscle memory of some way of like knowing like, okay, I know what it feels like to be centered. I know what
Mhm.
I need to be centered. I know when I'm off centered and I know how to get myself back to
Right.
center. But it
And I
doesn't
think,
mean that you're not going to, it's kind of like the waves on the ocean. Like if you learn how to stand at the edge of the ocean, no matter what the waves are, then it's like, okay, the waves are going to keep coming, but I can stay stationary.
right.
I won't get flipped over. I might like go like this, but I'm
Yeah.
just still going to stay stationary. And I like the whole idea of like really making it customized because a lot of times, especially high achievers, you see everybody else doing things. This is one of the things I always talk with my clients about when they are working on their marketing is you've got to let go of like noticing what everybody else is doing. Like if
Right.
you don't like going to networking events, then don't go to networking events. If you don't like going social media, then don't do social media. There's 1,000 other ways that you can attract
Mhm.
clients and create awareness. But I think as high achievers, we're so susceptible, like, well, they're doing that. So I guess I should add that to my to-do list. And I should add that to my
Right.
to-do list. And I should add that to my to-do list. Somebody might be listening. It's like, well, you have a personal trainer. Well, I want a personal trainer. I should get
Right.
a personal trainer where it really is about me. Like, what do I need?
Yeah.
For me, I'm like you. I need my morning routines. For my husband, he likes to go skiing. We just moved to Denver. So skiing was like very meditative for him,
Mhm.
and it made him feel accomplished. So everybody's different. I have some
Right.
clients who are men who just, they love like, if I could just put golf, 4 hours a week, get some golf in there, that does a huge amount for me,
Right.
and it's like whatever it looks like for you. All right. I'm excited to get to the E now. Cause now I feel like we're coming home. So
Right. So
we
actually
triaged
when
our energy. We have,
um
we've gone to the awakening. Now we are, wait, what's the A again? No, wait, the
awaken.
awakening's the A, and then U is unraveling.
Mhm.
And now we have self-care,
Right.
self connecting with
Space,
self.
yeah.
Yay. Okay. Space. All right. Ready
Right.
for E.
Yeah, so originally when I created it, E was embrace, to be honest. And I thought, okay, you're going to embrace your best version of yourself. But since, when I first created it, the E is actually elevate because
Ooh.
I am all about vibrations and energy. And so elevate to me is now you have come into a space where you know who you are, um, you know, and you are also now attracting that into your, environment to you. So, you know, by an example is that, I was in my pharmacy mode, I was in my bubble. Everything I did was in pharmacy world. It was doom and gloom, and the people around me, were there's complaints, da 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 da. And now where I'm at in my life, I kid you not, there isn't a day that doesn't go by that I don't get a message from somebody that is opening a door for something else or an opportunity and so forth. Because now I feel like I have also come into a different level for myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I am attracting that energy because I am willing to receive it. Whereas before I was shut down, disconnected, and I wasn't, things may have been coming my way and I had no idea before. And so I feel like that is why the end of it is really to elevate, because now you are at a whole different, even if you're, thinking about was it Maslow's pyramid of what level you're at, your basic needs to your psychological needs and so forth. So by the time you're, have gone through these stages, you're at that, the more self-actualization, where you're now thinking about what is life, where are you at, and you're thinking much bigger than just those basic needs, whereas you were in survival mode of just getting through the day, building a business and all of that. Now you're more in, okay, I can enjoy life and there's a purpose to life and there's so much possibility, and more in that abundance mindset. And I will be the first person to say that, again, I was like, I mean, I know hard work and I know what it takes to build. And I've come full circle to, what, everything is energetic. And if you are at that stage of your life or in that level where you're elevated, things will come to you because you're going to be aware. You've unraveled the clutter so that you're able to have the space to receive that energy. And so that's kind of what I've done.
So I think it's so interesting that the pause model begins and ends with energy.
Mm-hmm.
That you begin with just like triaging almost like where the energy drains are. And it's like, you're not like, it seems like in the P part, I mean, in the P part, you're just plugging up the holes, just get into stasis. And then when you get to the end, where you're elevating it's like you have a different energy, not just like in terms of like, oh, I'm not tired at the end of the day, but a certain vibrational
Mm-hmm.
energy, that you started off here. So it sounds like in the terms of like the pause that you go here's the ordinary day of the office where I'm like in this like wake up time where it's like, all right, I'm not happy. I have my choices to what I could do here. I can go for a quick fix. I could say, forget it. I don't even care. I'm just going to keep in my old identity. Or you could do the pause. And then you go through this whole thing. And it seems like on the other side is a life of abundance, purpose, self-actualization, all those things on the other side. And so the pause model really moves you out of that survival mode into, the higher on the Maslow. That's where the outcome is. And so then you could activate whatever your purpose is. And I know that that's a huge question that so many people have at midlife is, who am I? What do I want? What's my purpose? That's what they want to know. And the pause, it's the power of the pause that will help you either activate that purpose or squelch that purpose. If you embrace the pause, you can activate it. If you ignore it, you're going to squelch it.
Yeah, no, you've kind of just summed it up in 1 minute.
Yay.
So,
Yay.
Okay.
But no, so this is so powerful. And I want to talk a little bit more about like how, because now it's like, okay, good, I got the summary. But now people are wondering like, well, what do I do with it? How do I go through the pause? And I know you have individual programs, you have group programs. You've just recently launched your website in concurrence with your 50th birthday. Yay. Because that was one of the things we were working on.
Yeah.
So talk to me about how people can find you and tell me more about your one-on-one coaching, the group programs, or anything else that you've got going on, and how they can find you and sign up.
Yes, thank you. So we have, on the website, www.sunrise, so it's SUNRAIS with my name, sunrisehealth.com. And individually, I am a very strong believer of working one-on-one. I think, even you and I, when we worked one-on-one. I've signed up for different programs. That's just not me, where I've got modules that I have not even finished still. So I am that type of person where, giving that attention is what's needed. This is, that pause. And it's like you get the full attention. Again, going through stages, 3 stages is what we work with: the physical health first, to kind of really see what's going on. And we use the pause methodology infused into the work of really how we can get you physically healthy. And
So
then
I want to I want to emphasize something on this one. I think what's really cool about what you're talking about is getting physically healthy is you do have a medical background with your
Mhm.
coaching. So you have your functional medicine, you have your traditional medicine that allowed you, and you have your coaching. So when you have somebody like that's a really unique distinction. So when you are offering that, people really need to understand that it's not like you're just over here and you're having somebody who's just working with one part of you and you're
Mhm.
not working with somebody who's just like a coach and it's just going to talk about that. You're really bringing this together in terms of
Yeah,
a
and
whole
I think
person.
the dynamic part is that, although I'm not leaning in as a pharmacist, the knowledge and the expertise is always with me. So you are, like you said, getting that package, and the knowledge of functional medicine and what labs mean. Because a lot of times, if you just to use one example, you get labs and everybody, and you're told that everything's normal, you're within normal, when most of the time that you don't feel good, something is off, but you get this clean bill of health that you're healthy. And so that is the part of, like, okay, what's going on that's creating that? And that is more with the lifestyle. So, I'm not providing medical advice, but it is like going and looking at your lifestyle and helping um my clients make those right choices and really understand what their labs mean, and so forth, so that they can make better choices and be more informed, and be their own advocate when they're working with their medical provider as well too, so that they know what questions to ask, and what tests they should be having as well
Yeah.
too, and what do they mean, because that in itself is really important.
That's huge.
So
That's such a huge thing that you have that perspective
mhm.
that yes, they might go to a regular doctor, integrative health doctor, but be in this phase, you're helping them. So this is phase one is get their physical health together. What's the second phase?
Then we start looking at, their mental health. And so with that, now that they got a little bit more energy, then we can start looking at, again, what is going on, their emotions, and so forth. And again, not being a therapist, but a lot of it is tied into what are those stories, what is, kind of like, again, delving into the pause methodology of what is creating that stress in your life, what is holding you back, what are some of the things that we can start implementing. And that could be, like, again, a strong morning routine, or maybe it's your evening routine, the meditation. All of that is part of even journaling. As simple as it may sound, it's nice to get things out of your head and onto paper.
Right.
And adding different modalities. Again, it's a lifestyle. We're recreating things that we've never we it, these things were not modeled for us, and we weren't taught, and so it's like relearning how to be an adult,
And
and bring those other aspects of, what is success and how does it look like, and unlayering all of that.
so we dealt with our mind, our body and our heart and mind. Like what's the third phase then?
The third phase is spirituality. And so for me, that is the most important. That's like your connection to self, your connection to others, and connection to a higher power, being, the nature, whatever your beliefs are, with that. But that connection is what I found I was missing. Even though I physically was fit, and I had a good mindset. I know, I had a good drive, but what I was missing was that connection, and that connection to myself, that trust with myself. And so again, you can't start with that right away, because you have to have the energy to give yourself that space. And then you can't, again, give yourself that space until you unravel some of the weight you're carrying.
So
And
it's
so
like
it's
you're
like that
going up the
stage.
Maslow, like
Mhm.
you go in that order, or if somebody's,
Yeah.
chakra system, you're going up those order all the way up
Right.
to the top. So it's
Right.
so
From
the
the
what
top
I
one.
think is really cool too about what you're describing with your coaching is it's not like you have to get rid of anybody else that you might be working with, but you can get more value out of it. Like, so
Right.
you're the one who's going to make sure, like, it's not like whatever your spiritual practice is, like this is going to replace it, or what you might do with your therapist, or what you might do with your regular doctor, or your workouts, or whatever you're actually doing. It's not like you're changing everything. It's just you're going to create more value out of it and put more intentionality to the whole experience.
Yeah, no, it's always that, my clients, the first and foremost is that, what you should still be working with a provider. I'm not, regardless of me being licensed as a pharmacist, I am not, I'm here as your wellness coach. And not, and so if you're in therapy, that is still there. I think it's just understanding that there's so many different dots to connect. And I am basically helping you guide connecting those dots.
So
And
you're
so,
like an organizational consultant for people, where it's like you take your systems thinking and you help them,
yeah,
like, align up their internal system, just
right.
like an organizational consultant will go in an organization. So we talked about a lot of different things
I
today. This has
know.
been so amazing. So we talked a lot about, I love your pause model. And is that on your website as well?
It is on my website. Yeah. And then we, social, we're active on social media, Instagram at Sunrise Health, LinkedIn, I'm very active. So if anybody wants to connect, please feel free to connect with me there. We are also, which I'm really excited about because I am an in-person, energetic, vibe. We will be in the new year creating different experiences each quarter. So what we did was we broke the year down into 4 quarters. And so it will be reimagine the first quarter, then renewal for a second quarter, and then revive, and then revolve. So again, infusing the whole pause methodology. And this will be more for those people that are not ready to do the full work, but they can join in the membership, and we will take you through the year in a slower process, but also using the same methodology. Where we will have virtual events. You will have access to the experts we have coming in, but then also in-person events as well too, which we'll do in different areas.
Awesome. Okay.
So
So we
that'll
talked
be
about,
something new.
love that. And I love the fact that you're going to break it out. So you have all this customization. I love that personalized support and that customization. So we talked about a lot of different things of what can happen to a high achiever at midlife. And we talked about the pause model. We talked about so many different things. Is there anything else that you would want to tell me about midlife reinvention? And I just didn't ask you the right questions.
No, I think the last thing I would really say, it's never too early and it's never too late.
Ooh.
And I think because that was one of my things, like, midlife and menopause are interchanged. Menopause for women is one stage, a big stage, but just one stage of midlife. There's so many other things that are going on, and it is, the time that you have the opportunity to put yourself first, and opportunity to do the things that perhaps you put on the back burner because other stuff came in your way. And there's no reason that you shouldn't. And so I think, again, it's the best time. I feel the best that I've ever felt in my whole life. I feel like
Wow.
there's so many opportunities that are just awaiting. The best way I feel like is like, when I was a young girl, I loved playing in the park. I mean, it's that same feeling of freedom, of like, like jumping off of that swing and not worrying about if I'm going to land or not. I used to do that. And so that adventure is back, that, I was always, for some time, like I went to pharmacy school, became a pharmacist, became a mom. I became so guarded and, protective of everything that whole adventure kind of just softened. And so I think with this, for me personally, I think that is what's come out, is that there's possibilities in everything. And it's the choices are there for me to make.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
It's never too early. It's never too late to work on becoming who you actually always were.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. And for all of you who are listening in, thank you so much. And until next time, I don't even know. I suck at the endings too. Sorry. Thank you so much for being on the show, Rajinder. This has been really powerful. And thank you all for listening. And until next time, God, I can't even, why can't I do the beginnings to ends? Thank you so much for being on the show, Rajinder. This was so powerful. And thank you all for listening. And I will see you all in the next show. Thank you.
Thank you.